Welcome and thank you for being here at our Thursday monthly lecture. I want to make just a couple of announcements about things that are coming up in and around the garden. Summer Festival is next weekend, not this weekend, next weekend. There's so many great activities going on, from taiko drums and tea ceremonies to dancers, and there'll be food. So if you're in the neighborhood, stop by. It's really a pretty awesome event. Tuesday evening music continues. There's another great band coming on Tuesday evening. The show kicks off at 5:30 with the opening act, and then a band called American Aquarium, who played here 7 or 8 years ago and was outstanding. They'll be here. Other things going on: Garden Explorers, the program for kids in the morning. Today there was a magician out there. 310 kids came. 310 kids and their families came this morning. So it's a great way to introduce kids to the garden, and it becomes part of their life, which is a fundamentally good thing. And then just real briefly, really excited about next month's lecture as well. We have a professor from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, who we've gotten to know through the Center for East Asian Studies at UW-Madison. And Adam Kern wrote what I've read is the definitive English book on haiku. So he's a professor up there for quite a number of years now. So we're super excited about that. But before we get there, we're really happy to have Professor Kendall Brown here. Ken is right at the top of the list of most lectures here, probably in a close tie with Kimiko Gunji from the University of Illinois. So Ken's been here, gosh, I don't know, at least 4 lectures, over the years. Ken's been a great friend of the garden. He publishes in a variety of areas in regards to Japanese and Asian art, and has organized exhibitions for several American museums, exploring topics from modern woodblock prints to Art Deco, which I'd love to see that lecture sometime, the Japanese Art Deco lecture. I thought I was going to be able to say you can find his book, Quiet Beauty, The Japanese Gardens of North America, up in the gift shop, but it's actually sold out right now. So we're going to be waiting more copies. There's actually, I think it's 26 gardens of North America, and one of them, 26? 25. And one of those is a nice section on Anderson Gardens, as well as Visionary Landscape should be up there too, which focuses on 5 contemporary masters, including this garden designer, Hoichi Kurisu. Ken co-founded the North American Japanese Garden Association, which Nick Estes, he's the new head guy of the garden here. Nick and I are both on the board, and Ken and I actually was on the first board with Ken back in, gosh, 2010, 11? It's been a while. And I would say that I'm pretty sure, I'm confident in saying that Ken has seen more Japanese gardens in the world than anyone who has ever lived. I'll bet that's true. So, really looking forward to this lecture. Please give a warm Anderson Japanese Gardens welcome to Professor Ken.
Thank you, Tim, for that warm welcome, and it's good to be here.
Glad to have you.
Kuniko, my wife, and I, who's over there, have been to maybe more Japanese gardens than anyone in the world, because nobody else in their right mind would go to India and want to see Japanese gardens. One time we arrived in New Zealand, and the customs official said, "Purpose of your visit?" And we said, "Visit Japanese gardens." And he said, "I've done this for 37 years. Nobody has ever said that." So it just, it's desire more than anything. At any rate, it's a great pleasure to be here. I love the idea of the garden explorers, because gardens are really about exploring. We often feel that they're like knowledge, there's some knowledge or hidden secret, but it really is about the experience. And that's really what I would talk about today. And what I have learned from Hoichi Kurisu, the garden designer, and having been in many gardens, people often ask me, well, what are the best gardens? And I say, the ones that you feel best in. That's a good garden. It's really as simple as that. If you feel good, if you're having a good experience, that's the key word. So we're going to explore this idea of experience, and I'm going to use this term authenticity, which I have to say kind of bugs me. In my one of my early books on Japanese gardens in North America, I tried to get away from this idea of authentic, and I said that all Japanese gardens in America are authentic American gardens in Japanese styles. And there's a range of qualities and experiences, but let's get away from this term authenticity. So about 3 months ago, Doug Roth, the longtime publisher of Journal of Japanese Gardening, asked me to contribute a 150-word essay to his opinion section on things that are problematic in Japanese gardens in North America. And so I'm going to read you, and this is the structure of the first half of this lecture, my response. It'll be published next month, but you don't need to read it there. So among Japanese gardens in North America, most problematic, I think, is the concept of authenticity as superficially designed. Key. So I'm trying to get to a deeper level of authentic. On the surface level, authenticity is usually taken as an absolute, a definitive statement that stops deeper thought. So more or less, it's a check, it's a box. This garden is authentic, this one isn't. There, we're finished, we're done. It's got the stamp of approval. So clearly I'm arguing against this sort of black or white binary, it's authentic or it isn't, superficial. So usually when a garden is described as authentic, I'm encouraging, when you hear somebody say that or you see it in a pamphlet, authentic to what? Authentic how? Most importantly, authentic why? One of my professors, I remember on my dissertation committee, said, as historians, we have to ask the rude questions. Okay, what are the rude questions? So what, who cares? So why is it authentic? Who cares that it's authentic? Why is authenticity, if such a thing exists, meaningful? That's what I'm trying to get at. So this is my, this is how, when we hear the word authentic, we should be skeptical, like Dwayne Wingate's expression right now. In the usual, this is again, I'm quoting myself from this little thing that'll come out in the Journal of Japanese Gardening. In the authenticity paradigm, the easy and familiar approach to authenticity is to focus on some famous garden in Japan and copy some aspect of it in our garden here in North America or Europe or wherever, and then claim this new garden is authentic and maybe worthy and even superior to other gardens on a foreign soil because it's true, another word kind of in quotation marks, to some authentic and original garden. So there's originals in Japan, and we should authentically sort of copy them to some way. And here's a classic, so there's my quote again, focus on impressive. So in Brooklyn Botanic Garden, in 1963, Professor Takuma Tono, who designed the Portland Japanese Garden right around the same time, was hired to recreate a replica of the famous Ryoanji stone garden in Kyoto, built sometime in the 1516. Did it really look like this in 1600, where there's 15 stones, some moss in a bed of raked gravel with a stone wall. So they absolutely replicated this in Brooklyn at the Botanic Garden. It was torn out around 1974 because it really didn't work. People said, "Where's the botany? I'm paying for a botanic garden." So this, and so let's think about context. So even if, and I often say, so even if Godzilla went to Japan and scooped up a garden, let's say the Ryoanji garden, waded across the Pacific and set it down somewhere, okay, in Brooklyn, would it still be the same thing? Physically, it's the same thing, but is its meaning, its so what, its who cares the same thing? The Ryoanji temple garden was built by monks for Zen monks at a big Zen temple complex sometime in late kind of medieval Japan. The Ryoanji replica at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden is built in Brooklyn. There's Manhattan over there, here's Brooklyn Park Slope, the Brooklyn Art Museum, the Japanese Pond Garden is there, and it was built over here by the greenhouses. And it was built by Tono, and then he built another, and originally he was going to do a modern, contemporary stone garden, and the director, Dr. George Avery of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, said, no, we can't replicate a masterpiece, let's recreate it. So this is a recreated art masterpiece. And this is just part of the original pamphlet explaining, you know, it's non-represent, it's abstract art, it's meditation, but most of all, it's an art masterpiece. Now, as Tim said, I'm an art historian. I'm interested in art, I study art, but as often I've said when I've lectured here in other gardens, gardens are different from art. Not to say they aren't artistic, it's not to say they can't be art-like and masterpiece, but gardens are about experience. They change every day from morning to afternoon to night, to rain to cloud, to humid to windy, to winter to summer, to fall to summer, you know all that. Art masterpieces don't. A Picasso painting doesn't change. It doesn't have this experiential power that gardens do. So why are we comparing, why are we using art terms and art terminology like authentic to even think about gardens? I'm suggesting as an art historian that's a kind of false path that we've been led down. These are not new ideas. The famous garden designer, James Rose, who first was in Japan for the Battle of Okinawa, then went back as a Fulbright graduate student, famous Harvard Masters in Landscape Art. He wrote a book, many books, but one called Gardens Make Me Laugh, and he has one chapter called Ah, Japan. This is written in 1965, so I mean, what I'm saying is hardly new, but we've often forgot about it. And Rose says, basically, my first point, you can't take gardens out of a people and a culture. You can't take a garden out of a Zen temple in a Buddhist country and take that same garden and put it in a botanic garden in Brooklyn and have it really be the same thing. Even if it's absolutely a physical replica, it's going to change. Because it's no longer, you know, something built for the 1600s for a Zen Buddhist monastery where monks rake it as part of their contemplative practice. Nobody studies Zen meditation at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. There's no monks, Zen monks building this garden. So it isn't the same thing. Even the Rowanji Garden, now that it's a tourist attraction, is not the same as it was when there were only Zen monks there. So you can't capture, so I think Rose is really talking about this impossibility and maybe to be a little, I did have 3 sips of wine at dinner, the foolishness, so I'm going to speak boldly, the foolishness of this concept of authenticity on the superficial level of form. So let me go a little bit farther and trying to, you know, indicate why authenticity is a very problematic word. So again, quoting my soon-to-be published little piece in the Roth Journal, for gardens, this simplistic shortcut, authenticity or inauthentic, wears blinders. Superficial authenticity asks us to ignore all the things about this new authentic garden that are different. So we put blinders on. We don't see that they've substituted plants, that Japanese cherries, you know, won't grow here. Local stone stands in for some particular type of Japanese rock and features paths, bridge heights, water depths, architectures, all must meet American code that they didn't have in the 16th century. So let's just look at a few examples. So in California, a few years ago, an ambassador from Japan had a beautiful idea to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the cherry tree gift from Japan to Washington by giving cherry trees to gardens in all 50 states. And in California, we couldn't take them because there's a law that you can't take cherry fruit or cherry trees from states. This is the actual, I went to the website, California Department of Food and Agriculture. You can only bring cherry trees and fruit from a few counties in Utah, from Nevada and Arizona, and so they couldn't bring cherry trees, Somei Yoshino, into California. Couldn't be done. And even if you were to try, they wouldn't grow in most parts of California. So in the San Diego Friendship Garden, where they have a beautiful new Azumaya, I've heard, that you have cherry trees. It's a double hybrid, and they grafted them on to peach trees because the soil is too alkaline and the water is too salty. Peach trees will grow, cherry trees won't. So this is the best we can do in Southern California for cherry trees. It's hardly authentic. It's a Frankenstein graft. I mean, they're trying their best and they're beautiful, but it's not the same thing. It's not authentic to Japan. Let's say stones. This is one of Larry Ellison's gardens in Atherton, California, and he has beautiful stone, and it looks kind of superficially like stone, but this is Yuba bluestone. Now, I'm no geologist, but Yuba bluestone from the Yuba River in Northern California has very distinctive qualities which are quite different from granites in Japan. So many gardens in Kyoto use stone from Shikoku called Aoishi bluestone, but it's from Iyo, which is slightly different from Aya, and even these in Kyushu, the Iyo stone is different from the Iyo stone in striations. And again, if you have blinders on or your vision is not good, you might think they're the same, but if you really know anything or really bother to look, these are different types of granite. And then just other things, as I said, American public gardens, paths, the bridge heights, the water depths, the architectural features must all be up to code. So you have to, this is, again, I've just gone to the Americans with Disabilities Act website, and so walking surfaces, the slope can be no more than 5%. It has to have a continuous width on short distances, and so on, and surfaces must be firm, stable, and slip resistant. They didn't have this code in Japan when they had any of these gardens that we're trying to copy. So authenticity is pretty problematic. Now I'm going to go one step further, and I've told my wife to give me the signal if I go overboard here, because this thing really bothers me, authenticity. So, let's talk about putting blinders on. So one recalls the recent TV series Shogun. Who saw Shogun on FX? Who read the publicity? Now, the publicity was all sent out by the TV studio, authenticity, 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 but it was filmed in British Columbia. So Canada's Pacific Coast was an effective body double for Japan, only if you didn't look carefully and you had limited knowledge of geology, flora, and weather. So let's just, I just did a search, a Google search, authenticity Shogun. So a whole bunch of different things came up. ABC News, FX networks, this is NPR. Whatever you think about funding NPR, this article never should have been written. Glad that got a laugh. Shogun banked on authenticity. And so this is the quote. Now the first paragraph said, unlike the 1980 Richard Chamberlain Shogun, which was, they spoke in English, was inauthentic, this one took a different turn and banked on authenticity, and the effort paid off. All the characters are played by Japanese actors, they speak Japanese, there's subtitles. Authenticity was our lifeline, says Sanada, who was the actor and producer. Original plans to shoot in Canada and Japan, however, filmed in Vancouver. What? I thought it was authentic, filmed in Vancouver. And so let's actually look at some sets and read more from articles. The whole series shot in British Columbia with considerable transformation in post-production. I live in Hollywood, post means post-production. What? So this is all computer-added background. There was a tiny little, a few trees here in the foreground, they added the background. And so and so here people, we did all this special effects. So authentic computer graphics. Onto the British Columbia background. Then there's interior scenes. Again, remember, they banked on complete authenticity. Sorry, it's so small, I'll read it for you. So this is quoting the art director. So this is all set filmed in a sound studio. You can see this is the stage, the walls, the ceiling, the lights are up there. And so to create the ponds, they couldn't simply excavate the stage floor. So then they're quoting, they were contrived a bit. Remember, it's all authentic. The ponds were contrived a bit. We sort of raised up the topography around the ponds, so they were quite shallow, says Jarvis, the art director. By the time you filled them with fairly flat rocks, you've got 6 or 7 inches of water. What ponds in Japan are only 6 inches deep? What authentic ponds? And on, and you're just looking at them. These stepping stones, authentic. So let's look at a 16th, a garden built around 1600. This is the Sanboi Daigoji, built by the great warlord Hideyoshi, kind of the time of Shogun. Look at the stones. I mean, they used big stones. The pond is certainly deeper. Here's the authentic one in Shogun. They started off by saying, unlike the 1980 Richard Chamberlain Shogun, so if you simply went to IMDb, International Movie Database, where was the original inauthentic Shogun filmed? In Japan. So in the inauthentic Shogun, when they filmed in a Japanese garden, they filmed in a Japanese garden, not a Vancouver soundstage. These are real Japanese islands, that they don't have islands like this in Vancouver, and they filmed in real Japanese castles. So authenticity is a pretty problematic term that we should be skeptical about. Okay, so let's move from the kind of deconstruction of authenticity. So what can we put in its place? So when we free ourselves, again, going back to my short little 150-word article, when we free ourselves from superficial authenticity, we can discover those aspects of authenticity that are underrated. So maybe we should look at what are design principles that inspire new gardens. If authenticity isn't in the form, because we can't have the cherries, we can't have the path widths, those types of steppings by law, what can we do? Well, we can have design principles. So again, I'm not, I'm kind of reinventing the wheel here. Well, I'm not. People have said this before. So the late garden builder David Slauson and garden scholar David Slauson wrote an article in 2001, kind of ironically published in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden Journal. You can find it online, called Authenticity in Japanese Landscape Design. And at first, Slauson says, there's two paths, the kind of superficial or low path, and then the higher path. And the superficial low path, did I skip a slide? Maybe I left it out. The low path is what I've just outlined, the form, or, and that should be avoided. So let's focus now on the positive. What are positive ways we can take this idea of authenticity? So the higher path, as Slauson says, is instead of what's an authentic builder, a garden maker from Tokyo or Kyoto, and authentic Japanese materials and Japanese forms, arched bridges and so forth, let's look instead at what Slauson calls situation. Inspiration comes from in. Let's look at the landscape. Let's look at the local materials, the way that people in Japan historically had done it. So instead of mere rigid convention, let's understand principles that allow us to design freely. And this is his higher path. And so this is actually from the article, Slauson. So what are these timeless principles that we can, authentic principles, not forms, that we can take and adapt? So first he says proportion, and actually taking a lecture that Slauson gave for the first NASGA conference, and actually using his own slides and his own words. This is all Slauson over here in gray. So proportion, we can plant trees in proportion to each other, to buildings, to rocks. We can prune them to bring out their characters, to evoke the natural world. That's a quote-unquote authentic principle that we can adapt. Slauson then says, well, in designing pathways and compositions, we can use S-curves, we can use zigzags. These are kind of authentic principles of paths. And we can arrange, whether it's stones or whole compositional settings, based on horizontal or vertical diagonal planes. Again, this is from Slauson's lecture. So these are some design principles. And his bigger point is, the second way is that Japanese gardens, according to Slauson, their authentic concept was to evoke natural scenery. So I'm quoting Slauson here. He's quoting an old text from the 16th century. Design the garden so that its beauty accords with the site, the passage of time, and that it creates a feeling that's quiet and graceful. And so Slauson interprets this very much as evoking natural scenery. So this is a garden that Slauson built in Portland, later taken away, that's trying to evoke the Oregon coast. Portland's not right on the coast, but if you drove through the mountains down to the coast, you'd be in these places, and Slauson is trying to evoke that. So that's Slauson's approach to this authenticity issue: reject the superficial forms and go to principles like evoke natural scenery. And he did this, in his best gardens really spectacularly well. This is the Ozarks, and for Dr. Heinzelman and his wife in Fayetteville, David Slauson, outside their house, you look out like you're kind of on a Japanese temple, and he built a little viewing bench, and there it is, and you look out, and Slauson is trying to evoke the natural scenery of the Ozarks. So there's no arch bridges or lanterns. It's that spirit of the place. And Slauson did this fairly often. This is at the Aspen Institute in Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And here is, from his own lecture, a photo he took soon after he finished it. This is my photo 20 years after visiting there. So he's trying to evoke the Roaring Fork Valley around Aspen. And so Slauson, at the end of his lecture on these two different approaches to authenticity, actually at the start of it, he says, what is really the essence of a Japanese style garden? Is it to symbolize religious or cultural ideas? No. Is it to include these traditional symbols, lanterns, basins, koi ponds? No. And the right answer is the third one for Slauson: evoke natural scenery in accord with the site and the owner's desire. And that's very compelling in many ways, and I don't disagree with it, but let's say maybe it has some limitations. So just staying at that garden in Aspen, trying to evoke the Roaring Fork. So when I visit gardens, I go and look at them and enjoy them, or not myself, and then ask my wife what she thinks, and then I watch other people. That's the test. It's not just what I think. If I don't like it, but other people flock to this place and enjoy it and have great body language, then it's good, no matter what I think. So I spent an afternoon at the Aspen Institute, and some families came and sat on the bench. Dad was looking at the garden, read the plaque. The kids didn't. That's not David Slauson's fault that the kids are bored. But spending an afternoon there, a bunch of people came through, and some of them, these women, sat, the garden was behind them, and they didn't even face it. Now, again, maybe we can't, and I think we could reasonably, so I kind of question some people. Well, you're here, there's this garden on the other side. Why are you looking? Well, I think one of these women said, why should I look at a garden which evokes the Rockies when I'm in the Rockies? And that was a reasonable question. When I have the real thing, why look at a distillation, an essence of the local nature? Or maybe we're tired of nature, we want to get away from it, and we don't even want to look at it at all, which is also a reasonable human response. So, although I agree with Slauson's basic idea, maybe it's not quite enough to adapt some of these principles and then just try and distill the nature of the site. A number of people, even at the popular level, have wrestled with this. This is a recent Better Homes and Gardens, 1923 October, so not very old. What are essential elements of an authentic garden? So there's a realization, okay, a Japanese garden is a set of design principles, not just superficial forms, but then they numbered them. And some of them make sense. There should be a sense of an entrance, there should be a sense of mystery. You should definitely use evergreens and moss, a pavilion, some viewing place, contrast of textures. That's important. You should create structure within your plants through good pruning and so a lot of good things. There were also some pretty funky things. Protect yourself from evil spirits. Try a pillar pagoda. Use artful additions. And they're graceful gravel gardens. So people are still wrestling with authentic principles. It's not that easy. So let's now move on to another, maybe more subtle. This is an article by John Powell, who's designed a number of gardens in the Midwest, one here in Rockford up the street. This is an article John wrote in Fine Gardening in October 2015, so 10 years ago, but he's sort of beginning his mature career then. To answer this question, so what are these enduring authentic principles? So John's says there are 5. I don't think he would maybe limit, but sort of 5 basics. One is seasonality. And again, this is from his article. So choose small, delicate flowers for the spring, healthy foliage in summer, so you don't want summer to be really full of flowers, but healthy greens, and then fall colors and intriguing structure of your plants, maybe your pines in the winter. So seasonality is important. We're not going to go into too much detail. Space. So Powell is pushing well beyond Slauson, who was in some ways his teacher. So space is create empty space. Architecture is a frame, forcing perspective. Well, that's kind of similar to some of Slauson's teaching. Subtlety, harmonious blend of plants. Quality, really, what makes an authentic garden is the quality of whatever you do. So often it's been said a good Japanese garden is a well-made and well-maintained garden. It's maybe as simple as that. So plants that you can prune and that you're able to take care of. Because if you can't, whatever else you do, it's not going to be in this authentic spirit of gardens in Japan. Proportion, relate to human scale. Everything in the garden should relate to each other and in some ways be dynamic. At the beginning of his article, John Powell kind of lays out, I think, the bigger issue, which is really my main one. He says, this is a quote from his introduction, so this is an old but endearing and creative tradition, Japanese gardens. And of course they capture the essence of the natural world, maybe the greater natural world, not the specific place. They're relatable to any kind of site, and then the really key issue he comes to the end is what I am calling the authentic experience, to evoke peace and tranquility. And these words behind me, for those of you who know them, get at that. So this is the key element, what I'm calling the authentic experience. So how do we feel, and how do these different approaches and methodologies and elements make us feel in the end? So let's actually look at some John Powell gardens. This is one up in northern Wisconsin, and there is a house, and the house has a kitchen and a living room and bedroom that look out to a forest. There's Kuniko giving it scale. There's the forest. There's a river down below with eagles and wild turkeys. And then there's a new guest garage and guest house. And there's a road behind, and so he built some Scots pines grove to block the road. We'll see a little garden there, and then the main garden. So let's take a little tour. First, from the guest house to the house, there's a breezeway that you walk along, or even to go from the house into the garage on the first floor to get into the cars. And John built a wonderful garden, again, this true to the site, and there's a dry waterfall, and the energy flows down as you're walking along the path. You're coming down the stream, and it dissipates out into the garden. There's the hedge of Scots pines blocking the road off. And it's beautifully framed when you're coming in over here. This is the framed view, that use of architecture to create the space, and it makes you feel, I was fortunate enough to spend a couple of nights and mornings and afternoons and days in clear weather, and I felt peaceful and tranquil. That sense of flow and energy and scale and proportion and creation of space in a foreground, middle ground, background, front, middle, back, laterally, horizontally, and one felt tranquil. And now we've gone out on the other side of the house looking towards the forest. There's a river down there. And I think, Tim, maybe there is a video. Oh, there it is. So we're imagining me, Kuniko, we're turning our head. This is what your eye is taking in. It was a rainstorm. The wind kicked up. There's the wind kicking up. But still, there's the foreground, the middle ground, the background, and then he integrates it into the forest. And that feeling, if you didn't tell you it was a Japanese-inspired garden, you might not know. But I think that it has that authentic feeling of the best gardens in Japan, of naturalness, of ease, of tranquility, of peaceful beauty, of these kind of concepts from tea, maybe. Here's another garden, much more dramatic. It's a modern building on western Michigan, looking at Lake Michigan. So Chicago's over there, Milwaukee's up there. We're in Benton Harbor, Michigan, with a very modern house, and obviously there's this dramatic view out to the lake. And John was taking the concept of, how do you respond to the site? How do you respond to the taste of the owner who is interested in modernism and great modern Asian, Chinese, Korean art collector, some Japanese art? And then how do you, as John told me when I interviewed him just last week, how do you project the house into the lake through the garden? How do you bring the lake into the house? And John built this, there's nothing overtly Japanese about it, really, but it has that spirit feeling and those central principles, so a kind of dry ocean that really it creates a foreground, a middle ground, a background. It creates a kind of quiet dynamism, and it works just magically. Having spent the night there, had breakfast and dinner, one was just transposed to a better world. And I didn't just take my word for it. I talked to the owners and asked them how they, and the husband, who was a cardiac specialist surgeon, did heart surgery, a very high pressure job. He said, I didn't think I wanted a garden. That was my wife's deal. I thought it would be too much work, but I'm drawn to the garden. I can't keep out of the garden. I want to mow the grass. I want to pull the weeds that grow up in the gravel. It pulls me in. And we enjoy it, they said, every moment we're here. So that authenticity of experience based on these subtle principles. And here's some other views of it. There's the human scale. So, and there's a side garden, and originally you could see from the house, you could see a bunch of neighbors' houses. John built a brushwood fence, a gate, this is construction photo, this is the finished photo. He also put in some water feature, which has a light sound as a sort of aural barrier. So not only visual barriers, visual distractions, sense of space, and creating a whole microcosmic world, and no longer are you being intruded. The neighbors are looking in, you're looking out at them, this sense of a harmonious, peaceful feeling. So again, to go back to there's John setting stones, taking cues, so it feels authentically Japanese, which it evokes these techniques, these principles, evoke peace and tranquility. So I hope we moved away from the old authenticity of superficial form and symbolism, the box, and how do principles create an effect? So my authenticity of experience. And this is not just Americans, David Slauson, Hoichi Kurisu, John Powell, but in late 19th, early 20th century Japan, one of the most famous designers, Ogawa Jihei VII, who's known by the name Ueji, designer, builder, all-around producer, radical rethinking Japanese gardens. It's about the organization of space. It's about the detail. It's about the sensibility. So Ueji developed a so-called rustic natural style. Almost no lanterns, no symbolism, no dry gravel. He wasn't building gardens for Zen monasteries. He's building gardens at villas. Larry Ellison now owns one of his gardens. So no reference to Japanese poetry or symbolic landscapes from Buddhism. In one of my classes, I had the students read Professor Amasaki Hiromasa's essay on Ueji, this garden builder, and this one student, Trinity Foster, as I recall, she summarized him. We aren't going to read the thing, but Professor Amasaki who's a garden historian and a garden builder, saying Ueji promoted peacefulness. How did he do it? The flow of water. Multi-sensory. So gardens are about sight, smell, touch, hearing, even implicitly taste. About seasonality, about the emotions that are that we feel. And all of this promotes relaxation, reflection, stress release. So again, whether it's Japanese like Ueji in the 1890s, 1910s, contemporary garden builders like John Powell, we very much feel this, exploration of authentic experience. And let's just look at some Ueji gardens. So in a small space, you want to bring, so famously he uses borrowed scenery, the Higashiyama, the Eastern Mountains. It's a very small triangular garden, maybe about 120 feet front to back, 30 feet wide, but it feels big because you look up to the mountains, you look up to the sky, and then there's the sense of dynamic flow, the waterfall which pumps in water, and ponds, and I like this black and white photo because you get the reflection of the light. You know, it's not surrounded by trees, it's not a deep, murky pond. That sense of very shallow ponds because they reflect light and they create sound. So it's the feeling that he's after, not any specific formal effect or old style. And the creative things, like super shallow pines with little rocks set in them, but it makes you aware of the surface of the water and the flow of the water. Creative things like using old millstones as stepping stones. So a sense of mindfulness, creativity, lightness, vibrancy, and a relaxed feeling, as if you're out in some rustic pastoral landscape and you're just, you know, well, that scene in The Sound of the Mountains. Sound of Music, Julie Andrews spinning around. My students wouldn't get this an older audience. Right? She's singing "The Hills Are Alive." That feeling that you have, that's what Ueji was after. This is another garden, the Nomura estate. Mr. Nomura founded the Japan Phone Company. But that sense of flowing water, open to the distant scenery, the sky, the movement, and creative, the way that that flow is even in the low-clipped azaleas and the stones, and the kind of silhouette or the flow, the topography of the hillside. Or he does really radical things. There's a tea house down here, and in front, before a tea house, you should cleanse your hands and mouth with water from a chozubachi, and he puts it in the stream. Nobody had ever done that, but it's about the feeling, the creativity. That's the point. So it's not that we Americans are breaking the rules. The best Japanese designers for hundreds of years, and before Ueji, there was Kobori Enshu in 1600, and before Kobori Enshu, there was Muso Soseki in 1400, who were, you know, reinvigorating the tradition. And one last Ueji garden I show, just, you get all the same characteristics: the sky, the distant hills, the flow of water, the shallow stream, the rocks. And I show this one, Maruyama Park in Kyoto, because my wife and I had our first date. 38 years ago. So let's now, to wrap it up in a conclusion, I think we're probably getting towards that time. So let's bring it right here to the Anderson Japanese Garden. So this is a photo actually from one of David Slosson's, that lecture that I showed you that's published in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. You can find it online. So he analyzed this flat garden, or we can various names for it, next to the guest house. The west pond is, big original pond is over there. Guest house is here. Slosson analyzed this as an example of the timeless principles of zigzag composition, S-curve, creation of foreground, middle ground, background, and movement from formal to semi-formal to informal. And it's true, it's all of those things, but I think it's more than that. Japanese gardens are more about timeless principles. They're about the impact and the effect. And those of you who've heard me lecture before, and this is repetition, but some famous University of Michigan professors, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, their second book, The Experience of Nature from a Psychological Perspective, they proposed a concept that I like a lot. The acronym is ART. I call myself an art historian, but not of art, but of attention restoration theory. That good gardens of any kind, you know, English landscape garden, whatever, Japanese garden, whatever, should restore our attention. What does that mean? Well, Kaplan said there's this term, soft fascination. And human brain has this soft fascination for things that are inherently intriguing. So hard fascination creates anxiety. A giant waterfall, Niagara Falls is hard fascination, and we feel a certain tension. In contrast, soft fascination is one form seen through another. The ripples of sand raked into a garden. What is the pattern? We're not sure. It softly fascinates us. We want to find out. And things with soft fascination, the Kaplans say, draw forth involuntary attention. Involuntary attention is effortless. And because our brain is effortlessly active, it's then restorative. And recent studies measuring brain waves and breathing rates and blood pressure have shown that certain types of gardens, Japanese gardens in particular, really have this restorative effect. It's not just hypothesized, medically it's demonstrable. So, and my point is that relative to other garden styles, a number of garden styles have restorativeness, but Japanese gardens, particularly naturalistic styles of Japanese gardens, are replete. They're just brimming with restorative characteristics. So the Kaplans, in their restorativeness study, said there's a scale, and restorativeness, involuntary attention, which is effortless, of soft fascination, less restorative, has 4 basic characteristics. One, when you're there and nowhere else. You feel you're in a microcosmic world. Time is sort of stopped, and you're there and nowhere else. They call that being away. Secondly, that we've always talked about soft fascination. You know, your mind is intrigued. You want to explore what's around the corner, and you think, but then coherence, you think you could. I know that path is going to lead me somewhere where I will feel that I will understand. Everything in this microcosm makes sense. It's all integrated. So we could take Slosson's idea of foreground, middle ground, background, formal, and now interpret it as coherence. This is a world that, you know, kind of compels us to try and understand it, and we're satisfied we can. Maybe like a good lecture. And then lastly, compatibility to view by. It's a little confusing, their term, but it means a sense of human belongings. This is a world in which we humans have a place. We have purchase. We have meaning. We find greater meaning here. We belong. And again, I think that although a variety of gardens, English gardens, Alpine gardens, have this restorativeness characteristics to varying degrees, Japanese gardens have them to the, not all, but you know, the naturalistic style that we see here and throughout the Anderson to a very high degree. And so let's just look at several parts of the Anderson garden with these restorativeness scale characteristics in mind. Here's the original pond garden. Here is the waterfall garden. Here is the garden which Hoichi Kurisu, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim said, was a modern garden informed by Japanese principles.
Contemporary garden strongly influenced by Japanese.
Strongly influenced, but wasn't quote unquote authentically Japanese. And you know, there's no lanterns, there's no characteristics of architecture. There's even some angels over in the corner. But it made you feel. It brought out involuntary attention, and it was restorative. And if that's the authentic goal of Japanese gardens, it's authentic. This, what did I mean by, I always put these slides in, so those of you who heard previous lectures. So the gardens are places for people. I remember as a young art historian, one of my mentors quoted one of his friends, a Chinese intellectual historian, said, "You art historians, you often lead art out of the world of people into like the style. It's like art created itself. People created art, and the people created it, you know, for themselves and their friends and their patrons. So you need to put people back into gardens." So I showed you a bunch of garden photos without people, but gardens in Japan, although when I first went to them, I always wanted to take a picture with no people, like it's a work of art. Then I had an epiphany. Gardens are artistic, but they're not like paintings or photographs. They're human experiential spaces. So let's look at people in them. And people historically did things in gardens. They drank, they caroused, they had poetry writing contests where they drank. If you wrote your poem incorrectly, you had to drink a penalty cup of wine and you got drunk. And you wrote a worse poem and you got penalized and you got more drunk and you had more fun. And of course they did this in the evening or when the moon was rising, not at high noon, not 9 to 5. And I think this was the lecture I gave last year where I tried to connect my world as a year and a half ago as an art historian. So paintings, this is not a garden, this is an idealized landscape. A Japanese 17th, 16th century painting of scholars in nature and set in, this is the museum label, imaginary landscape in China. But this is really about the enjoyment of nature, the enjoyment of idealized, not nature of tsunamis and hurricanes and volcanoes, but nature as we want it to be. Essentially, nature is a garden. And what is nature as a garden? What is the experience, that sense of coming together with each other, with nature, as I always end up with our better selves. So, I think in 45 minutes, hopefully we've taken a kind of winding path through Japanese and Japanese-American garden history and understood authenticity, not as form, maybe not even as principle, but as experience. Thank you.
We have a little time for questions.
Questions, comments, pushback? Last time I gave a lecture, I got some real pushback from somebody in the first group. Yes?
Well, I'm just curious if you've ever seen something you think is a true fail. Something in a garden that just was was not working out.
Absolutely. I won't name them, but I can think of a true fail. So they had all of the, they wanted an arched bridge, and they realized a bridge had to go over water, so they built a little, like, 8-inch wide stream. Like, so the concept of a bridge, it wasn't really bridging anything, and everything was like that. It was the work, I should have maybe showed it, but I don't want to embarrass, it was in Canada, it wasn't even in the US. You know, they just got everything wrong. It had zero feeling. It had all the symbolic things, every last one, and none of the feeling. Yes, so you do get some true fails, which are good to learn, you know, they're good lessons. You can learn as much from the negative models as the positive ones. But, you know, if you just look at the negative, then, you know, okay, I don't want to do that, but what do I do? So, any other questions or comments? Yes?
I'm a docent at the Murakami in
Yes.
South Florida, and it's in South Florida, which that alone makes
Alligators up to 14
alligators.
feet
We
in
have
the pond.
alligators, right, and palm trees and
Right.
things like that. So authenticity is
Right.
is important, but it is more about you're right, about the way people feel when
Absolutely.
they're there, because the winding paths and
Yes.
and everything, and it's Hoichi
And, you know, and as they
design.
developed the Walk for Wellness, you know,
Right.
it's all about the feeling.
Right.
And, you know, originally that garden was sort of about different period styles.
Right.
You know, there's the early Muromachi garden, the late Muromachi, and it became apparent that nobody really cared about that.
It, right,
If
yeah.
you want to learn about just different garden styles, get a book and flip through the chapters. But the garden, as it evolved, became about the experience. And just, you know, and it's the, this is a story that there was at the North American Japanese Garden Association, we had a conference at the Murakami in 2016. And we had people who had gone through their stroll for well-being, their walk for wellness. And it came in the most, which I had been skeptical about till I became a true believer. And one woman, her husband had died, like one of her children had died, and she said, I just closed up in the world. I became depressed, my whole body clenched. My therapist and friends recommend I take this walk for wellness. I'm not stupid. How is walking in a garden going to help me? And she said, I was in the garden and I crossed over a bridge. I turned a corner, and there was a windy day, and the bamboo, which had been rigid, started to bend and sway. And as the bamboo swayed, they knocked together and they made a sound. And then she said, I had an epiphany. The bamboo was, when it bent, it sang. Then I bent. I got rid of my rigidity so I could sing. Now that's not really planned in any of these ways, but I think Hoichi is thinking about things like that. You know, that kind of, you know, he's preparing you for having these experiences. When you become aware of yourself, your environment, texture, season, color, multi-sense sound, then you can have those kind of chance experiences. So it's a little like enlightenment, gradual, 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 and then boom. The bamboo sang, and she let go of all her pain, or much of it. Yes?
What about the middle class Japanese garden? Do they do the same thing, go for peace and tranquility? What do they actually do?
Yes, so not everybody is, you know, so Mr. Nomura, the founder of Japan Telephone and Telegraph, building these giant gardens. So when I lived in Kyoto in a kind of very working class district in an old 1850s, well, the old storehouses. They call these Japanese row houses the sleeping place of eels because they're deep and they're dark. And they took the old storehouses in the back, and my landlords turned them into apartments. And I lived in the back one. There was almost no light. I had rats and weasels and cockroaches, which I grew to tolerate. I didn't tolerate a snake in my apartment coming out of the roof, even though the landlord told me it was good luck because it would eat the rats, which was true. Rats were snakes. But there was a little tiny courtyard garden, and there was a little maple, and it turned reddish in the fall. And there was a little azalea, and then there was a little wind chime, a footing, and just that sound of the wind was supposed to make you think of a stream. And humble as it was, that very middle class, lower middle class garden created a modicum, a minimal but a minimally effective amount of relaxation, where I cherished it. Enough light, so the Japanese have really mastered, it's an excellent question, the ways to bring these basic features of seasonality, of creating space, of texture, of color, of feeling into very small spaces. So there's something called a tsubo niwa. Kind of a one tsubo is like 10 feet by 10 feet. And even in that, you can have these elements in kind of microcosmic form.
So they use a lot of sound too.
So absolutely using sound. Even one little water dropper is enough. Or the bell, which is supposed to, when it blows and there's this tinkling sound, and it's supposed to make you think of the stream. And it's enough to distract you from the sound of, you're still going to hear the neighbor's baby cry, but you can then focus on the sound of the wind chime. And get your mind in the right place. That's an excellent question. Because I did show sort of grand gardens, expensive gardens. But they don't have to be. Any other questions or comments? Well, hearing none, I thank you for coming.